Welcome to Dental Business RX. Practice success in 30 minutes or less.
Thank you for calling ABC Dental.
We all know that new patients are important, and it makes me think of the ad copy I've written over the years for the MGE New Patient Workshop, and I remember lines like, new patients are the lifeblood of your practice, etc. I mean, this isn't a point of discussion. We all know it. They're important. It's a no-brainer. But how many new patients does your practice actually need in order to be healthy on a monthly or yearly basis? Well, I can spit out a number, and I can provide some general guidelines, but it does to a large degree depend on the conditions in your individual practice. And that's what I want to talk about in this week's episode. We're going to cover some general guidelines on this so that you can maintain or fix your practice's health based on your new patient volume, along with a few points to look at in your practice that might adjust this number, your new patient requirement, up or down. My name is Jeff Bloomberg, and I'm your host, and let's start simple. What is and mind you, I'm talking about general dental practices. I'm not talking about specialty practices because obviously that's a whole different ballgame when we get into number of new patients. And I'm not even talking about a GP practice that's doing big FMR cases or all-on-4 cases or anything like that. I'm talking about your regular, general, run-of-the-mill general dental office. Maybe they restore implants. They don't even place them, okay? Regular general dental office. So how many new patients would this practice need in order to be healthy? Assuming that this practice is well established, has been around for a while, and it has an adequate number of charts, you need about 30 new patients. I'd say at the low end 20. But let's say to be comfortable, at least 30 new patients a month per doctor. And by doctor, I mean full-time. So if it's just you and maybe one or two hygienists, you need at least 30 to be healthy, okay, for the practice to be healthy. If you have an associate doctor and they're part-time, maybe 2 days a week, and you work a 4-day week, then you'd need 45 because you need 15 for that part-time associate. If you have two full-time doctors, you'd need 60 to be comfortable. Now, could you get away with less, and do practices get away with less? Yes, they do. I wouldn't advise it. I think 30 is a pretty good number. If you work an average month of 17 days, that's roughly 1.75 new patients per day. So, some days are 2 and some days are 1. Now, if it's a newer practice, like you've opened from scratch recently or you've only been around for a year, well, then those numbers start to go up because you're building your patient base. If I open a new practice, I'd want to see at least 40 new patients a month at the low end. I'd prefer 50 plus. Right? I'd go on a heavy marketing blitz when I open the place. And I'd be careful, especially in this day and age with the current economic environment and with what's happened with inflation and what's going on with various insurance companies lowering fees and reimbursements. I would try to avoid joining a bunch of plans to get all the new patients that I needed. I'd rather, if it was a little bit less volume, a little more painful, and this is just me speaking, okay, my opinion, but if this was me and I opened from scratch, I'd prefer to stick and stay at my normal fees rather than joining a bunch of plans just to create volume. Sure, maybe my volume is not as high in year one as it would be for the doc who joins every plan under the sun, moon, and stars. But number one, I'm getting paid what I'm worth for what I'm doing. And number two, it builds a little slower. I'm building in a sustainable way. It's sort of like you're starting with a bad habit, almost like when you exercise and you're lifting wrong and then you end up getting injured, right? And you have to retrain yourself to do it right. You're better off starting off the right way. Maybe it builds a little slower from a volume perspective, but in the long term, it works out best for your office. And look, if you're interested in getting more new patients or it's something that you want to be able to have some degree of control over, because the most important thing with your new patient flow, just like anything else in your business, is you want to be able to exercise some control. In other words, I'm confident I can get the number that I need, and if I want that number to go up, I'm confident that I can, by doing certain actions, I can get that number up. This is an important part of the business process because obviously new patients, they're the lifeblood of every practice, right? So I would recommend that you check out the MGE New Patient Workshop. We get into everything new patient related, not just how to market, but also how to market internally, how to handle these new patients when they come in to make sure that your conversion is higher. I'll put a link to it on the episode webpage so you can find out more. It's one of our first services, and that particular service does come with a money-back guarantee. So if you're not happy for any reason, $10,000 within 6 months of doing the course, we will refund your money, no questions asked, for the course tuition. So worth checking out. But yeah, the most important thing is that you're actually able to control this flow in an effective way. Right? So what makes marketing effective, obviously, is it's getting you leads, but it also has to be cost effective. If I'm spending $10,000 a month to make, I don't know, an ROI of 11,000 or less than 10,000, that's obviously not a good thing, right? So if you take a look at what gives you your ROI on marketing, it's not just getting people to call or having the phone ring, which is really all your marketing's going to do. It's going to get the phone to ring, or you're going to get a form lead off of your landing page or something like this. You have to be able to convert this patient. Obviously, you have to schedule them. But then, assuming you schedule them, once they show up, you have to actually be able to convert this patient into a long-term patient and preferably get them to accept the treatment they need. That's a sales issue. That's not so much a marketing issue. I've talked before about the MGE communication and sales seminars. I'll put a link to it on the episode webpage. Well, I've already pumped two things in the first 5 or 6 minutes of this podcast. Sorry about that, folks. But it is part of the whole. As a matter of fact, that's why it's the first thing we address with clients usually is marketing and sales, because those are the keys to income, as well as you're going to help your patients too, because they're getting the treatment that they need, right? So now, what are some additional points here that could modify your new patient requirement up or down, meaning you need more or you maybe could sustain with less, which I really wouldn't recommend. And it's funny, you'll see as I describe this, if you do this right, specifically with a dental office, you'll hit a certain point where if you're doing this correctly, you're actually going to start to run out of space, which I'll explain in a second. Like your facility is just going to not be enough for you in the long term unless you have a really massive facility. So what are some additional points that could or make this requirement go up or down? The first one is the condition of your hygiene department. So if you think about the business cycle in a dental practice, specifically a general dental practice, you're bringing patients in. The idea is you're going to remain their doctor, hopefully for their lifetime or your lifetime, right? Or they stay with the practice for their lifetime. That's the general concept when you're bringing in. So if you think with that, and I'll give you some numbers here in a second, I won't go too crazy with them, but if you're acquiring patients, and you're really good at retaining them, it's sort of like filling up a bucket with water, not to compare patients to water, which I guess that's not really a insulting comparison, but whatever. You're going to hit a point where the bucket's just too small. Okay? And what happens with a lot of practices is they don't retain patients well. This is one of the largest problems in the dental industry. You've probably heard me talk about this before if you've listened to the podcast for any time. But the worse your hygiene department is at retaining patients, the more apparent new patients you will, quote unquote, I'm using quotation fingers, need in order to sustain your practice's health. And you essentially take your GP practice and turn yourself into a specialist. If I'm an oral surgeon, I have to get new patients. That's how I live. I live off of referrals from general dentists, and there might be some direct advertising I'm even doing if I'm doing it for implants or something like this, because I don't have a recall program. I don't have they're seeing me for a one-off. They're seeing me for extractions. They're seeing me for some type of surgery. They're seeing me to place implants. They're not going to be showing up for recall regularly or to get fillings done if I'm an oral surgeon. So my entire business model is predicated off of new patients. Same thing with an endodontist. I do root canals and, various other forms of endodontics, but that's it. So they have to get new patients. But then you'll see a GP practice where they kind of ignore their hygiene area because, it's tough to find a hygienist or hygienists are expensive or whatever. And as a result, they don't have that consistent flow. And so now the office isn't very busy. So they figure, well, gosh, I just need to get more new patients in order to get busier. So again, you do need new patients. You should always have a steady flow of new patients. It should be a controllable flow. Well, let me give you some numbers to demonstrate, and I want you to roll these around your mind for a second. So I have my little spreadsheet here that I did before I came up to record. But let's say your practice is averaging 30 new patients per month. Like you open up, and that's all you're getting. You open from scratch, and you get 30 new patients a month for 10 years. That's just what you're doing. Every month is 30 new patients. Now, the first question I would ask you is what percentage of these folks would you expect to lose? How many of these patients would not stick with your practice? If you're the average person, you're going to say something like 20%. Okay, so 2 out of 10 or 1 out of 5 people aren't going to stick with the practice. So we've got this 20% attrition rate. Okay, so let's run these numbers. Year 1, you get 30 new patients a month. So that means for the year, you got 360 new patients for that year. But 20% aren't going to stick with the practice. They came in, said they were just shopping, you did a treatment plan, and they, know somebody who can get them implants cheaper or whatever, right? So they leave. So that means out of those 360 patients, you lose 20%, which leaves you with 288 patients, okay? So you got 360, you lost 20%, leaves you with 288 patients. Now, those 288 patients, if they stick with your practice, will need at minimum 2 recalls a year. Some might need 3, some might need 4, okay? So if we just go off the 2, we're going to be conservative here. 288 patients times 2 is 576 recall visits, okay? How does that break down, over the course of a year? Well, if you're open 50 weeks a year, you're with me still, right? If you're driving, I apologize for numbers, but these are pretty simple, right? So 576 recall visits. Let's say you're open 50 weeks a year, you take 2 weeks a year off. That's 11 and a half recall visits a week. So if we say a hygienist can see 8 patients a day, you now have almost a day and a half of hygiene. You see? Just from year 1. That's what you've generated. Now, if we extrapolate this forward every year, you keep getting 30 new patients, okay, and you only have a 20% attrition rate. And obviously what this doesn't account for is patients who came in year 1 and leave in year 8, okay? But bear with me here. If you do this for 10 years, 30 new patients a month, lose 20%. 30 new patients a month, lose 20%. In year 10, what does this look like? Well, you got your 30 new patients a month. You saw 360 for the year. You got your 288 net patients after losing 20%, okay? Your total patient base now has gone from 288 people in year 1, leaves you with 2,880 patients in year 10. 10 times 288 per year. You have almost 3,000 patients by year 10. What does that work out to be for recalls at 2 a year? 5,760 recalls by year 10. And mind you, this is just getting 30 new patients a month for the last 10 years. Okay? That's it. What does that work out to per week? That's 115 recall appointments a week if you work 50 weeks a year. How many days of hygiene is that per week? 14.4. So what that literally means is in a given week in your practice, there are 14 and a half days of recall. Not even hygiene, because if you have a soft tissue management program, which is, the funny thing is when you look at the various hygiene programs, they're primarily focused on improving your soft tissue management, scaling, root playing, et cetera, because they're higher ticket items. But this gets ignored, which to me is silly. Okay, and I'll talk about why in a second. But you have 14 and a half days of hygiene a week. So how many hygienists, just for recall? It's more than 3.5 hygienists just doing recall patients. Now, if you run new patients through hygiene and you have a decent soft tissue management program, you're looking at 4, possibly 5 hygienists full time if you work, a 4-day week, 5-day week, or whatever. This is on a 4-day week, just to accommodate your patients that you've acquired over the last 10 years. Okay, so think about that for a minute. If you've got 5 chairs, imagine four of these chairs, possibly 4.5, being eaten up with hygiene. Then you look at what you would have to have for the rest of the practice. There's no way one doc is going to keep up with 4 hygiene chairs and 30 new patients a month. You're going to need a second doctor, possibly even another part-time doctor, just to, keep up with the traffic. And this is just on 30 new patients a month, assuming that the retention is decent at the back end. And this is with a 20% attrition rate, if you only lose 20% of the patients. Now, let's take a more conservative scenario, more realistic scenario. Let's say your attrition rate is 40%. 4 out of 10 patients who walk through your door, you don't see again, okay? That's a pretty high attrition rate, but how do those numbers pan out? Well, if we start in year 1, we get our 30 new patients a month. We get our 360 for the year. We lose 4 out of 10. We lose 40%. That leaves us with 216 patients by the end of the year, okay? Now, for recall, That's 432, if we multiply this by 2, 432 recall visits. If we work 50 weeks a year, that's 8.64 hygiene patients per week, or about a day of hygiene a week. So we've been open for 1 year. We've lost 40% of our patients. By the end of that year, we should have a day a week of hygiene just to accommodate our current patient base. Let's extrapolate that forward into year 10 now with this 40% attrition rate. We've gone 10 years. How many patients do we have at the end of this? Well, our total patient count at the end of 10 years, because we're only retaining 216 a year, is 2,160. How many recall visits does that equate to? 4,320, which works out to be 86 recalls a week or 10 days of hygiene, recall hygiene per week. That's over 2.5 hygienists just doing recall appointments, okay? And the reason I bring this up is, again, because, the funny thing, the way, especially if you see new patients in hygiene, the way this ends up working out is you see openings in the hygiene schedule. So then if new patients fill these or soft tissue management appointments fill these, as long as your hygienist is full, nobody worries about it. They're not thinking with the fact that their hygiene should be growing every year. Based on these numbers I just gave you, even at a 40% attrition rate, by year 2, you should have 2 days of hygiene. By year 3, you have a little over 3. By year 4, you should have a 4-day-a-week hygienist. Actually, a little bit more than 4 days, just treating recall. Okay, by year 4, you're only getting 30 new patients per month. So what ends up happening is, because soft tissue management take these slots, and if you see new patients through hygiene, that takes these slots. And because the hygienist is booked, because we don't want to see our hygienists not busy and sharpening instruments or up at the front talking to the front desk staff or on the phone, we think that there's not a problem. We're ignoring the fact that hygiene didn't grow at least a day a week this year. We had 3 days last year. We have 3 days this year when we really should have 4. Okay, so this is a thing. This is something that happens all the time. I would say it happens at least 80 to 90% of the time. Some are better than others, but very rarely do you see somebody who really maxes out this hygiene area. And because there's not a lot of volume coming in the practice and you're looking for treatment opportunities, the solution always becomes new patients. So like I said, new patients are important. You should be getting new patients, but you should also really, most of your income should be coming from your patients of record, because I guarantee you not everybody is accepting their treatment first time it's presented. You probably have anywhere from hundreds of thousands to millions of dollars in incomplete treatment. And if you keep these patients around and they keep coming back, eventually they're going to accept it. And if you look at it from a straight economic perspective, it costs me a lot more money to go out and market to get a new patient than it does just to bring a patient back who's already met me before, to, recover a patient or reactivate a patient. That's a lot cheaper than it's going to cost me to create a whole new patient opportunity, which again, doesn't mean you shouldn't be doing that, but I want you to balance these two things, I guess, if I had to, if I wanted to get a quick way of saying it. I know I talk about this a lot, especially if you're a regular listener, you know this, but it is one of the worst areas in dentistry from a business perspective. Now, if you take those numbers I was just going over, and let's say you only lose 20%, or let's say you're getting more than 30 new patients per month, and let's say, when you opened your practice, you had it plumbed for 6 chairs, and you have 4 now, and you have a full-time and a part-time hygienist, 6 days of hygiene per week. And, you're plugging along, and then you decide to make a real concerted effort to boost your hygiene area, right? And you want to maximize it. Let's say you're one of these people who've been in practice for 10 years, right? Well, you're going to hit a point where there's so much hygiene going on, you're going to have to add additional ops. Well, you're going to max out at a point at 6 ops. And let's say you've got 6 chairs and you need 4 or 5 hygienists just to accommodate your ever-growing patient base, because you're really on point when it comes to retention. Well, you're not going to have enough chairs for the docs, for you and your associate that you'll need by that point. You eventually will outgrow your space. It's something that's inevitable if you do this right. So it's just something to keep in mind. I'm not saying if you're a newer practitioner, plumb your new office for 12 chairs. I mean, whatever, right? I mean, you could if you really wanted to. But if you do this correctly, it's inevitable that a practice will eventually outgrow their facility if they're making sure they're continuing to retain patients while they get a steady flow of new patients. So your new patient requirement will be artificially inflated if your hygiene area is ignored, okay? So, but I still, even with a healthy hygiene area, I would say 30 new patients per doc is a healthy place to be. And the last thing I'll say on this, it's actually the last 2 things, is, let's say you find yourself in that boat. You're really pushing your hygiene program. The chairs are filling up. You're starting to run out of space. You're wondering what to do. What do you do at that point before you go build out a new office for $600,000? Well, there's a couple points I would do before I really seriously looked at relocating. If there's just no more space, I can't blow into the next suite next door. Or I've already given up my office to make it a chair, right? The first thing I would do is I would take a look at, if I'm in network with any plans, I would probably drop all my plans, right? You could do this systematically. We have different ways of helping you do this. You have to do it in a way that's comfortable for you. I've seen some people who go, I'm just going to do it, cold water dip, and then it's really rough. There's certain ways of doing it to make it easier on you so you don't lose your mind as you're doing it. We can help you with something called the fees and plans analysis. It's a free analysis. I'll put a link to it on the episode webpage. Wow, that's my third thing I'm pumping in this episode. Pretty good, right? But drop your plans, because the worst that's going to happen when you drop plans is you're usually going to lose about 30% of the patients. So if you're filling up, you get more new patients, and you're really on point with your recall and your reactivation, and all of a sudden you're running out of chair space, then drop plans. You may lose some volume, but you're going to recover it in profitability and, reduced costs and things like this, because now you're actually getting paid full boat for your services. That's the first thing. The second thing you can do, let's say you've dropped plans and you've got, let's paint a scenario here, a 4-day-a-week office. Maybe you're there 4.5 days a week. You work, 8 to 4, Monday through Thursday, and from 8 to noon on Friday, right? And you've dropped your plans, and you're packed now. There's just nowhere else to put people. You've got 3 hygienists going, and you and an associate, you're sharing a second chair. It's tight, right? And you've dropped all your plans. You're working 8 to 4. The next thing that you can do is you're paying for that office 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You could open up what we call a second shift, where maybe shift 1 moves from 7 to 2 or something like this, and shift 2 starts at 2 to 7 or 2 to 8 or something like this. And you can end up with a situation where the office is basically open a lot more hours, but not with the same team. Shift 1 has its own team. Shift 2 has its own team. You're using the same software and the same charts and things like this. But essentially, there's a person who's like the day scheduler, and then there's the night scheduler, right? And they all have their own statistics and the whole thing. And then you're maximizing your space. You can open up Saturdays that way or whatever as well. Now, again, let's play the inevitable. Let's say you're aggressively growing, things are going well, and you've dumped all your plans, and your fees are decent, and your office is open 6 days a week. Not that you're there 6 days a week. You're there 4, just like you're supposed to be, and you have an associate there 4, right? You may hit a point where you've even maxed that out, in which case, then it might not be a bad idea to get another facility, but you're going to be killing it. Profitability will be great. So finding another facility and taking your time to find the right place isn't that big of a deal. All right, so that's the first thing that can adjust your new patient numbers up or down, which is or definitely inflate your requirement artificially, is having an inefficient hygiene area that isn't retaining patients. And it's something that's built into your model. You should absolutely do it. The next thing that might modify your new patient requirement is how aggressively you want to grow. So obviously, with a newer practice, you're at 0. So you want to grow really aggressively, which is why you want a lot of new patients. And sometimes someone will go, you know what, look, I just want to blow the doors off. I want to do great here, etc. So I just want to get, I'm getting 30 new patients now. Now I want 60, 70, 80, 90, etc. And that's great. But when you're doing that with this aggressive growth, there's a couple things to keep in mind. Right? First thing is what I just talked about. Make sure you're maximizing your hygiene while you're going after more new patients. All right? Second thing is, I talked about this on episode, I think it was 95, the law of diminishing returns. I also did a video of it on YouTube. I'll put the video link in the episode webpage. But you can get to this point where you're getting, let's say, 30 new patients a month, and you do the math, and my revenue from 30 new patients a month is, let's say it's, $50,000. Okay, so 30 new patients a month gets you $50,000, and you go, well, if I get 60 new patients, I should make $100,000 off my new patients, right? I'm making 50 off of 30. I should make 100 off of 60. This is where the law of diminishing returns comes into play, because there's several factors which takes those 30 new patients and turns it into $50,000. Okay, There's several different factors. It's not just having them schedule and walk in the door. It's, number one, having the ability to accommodate these people with the incoming phone calls, like making sure that whoever's answering the phone and scheduling has enough time to adequately handle these incoming leads. That's the first thing. Then once the incoming lead is accommodated, do you have the hygiene space for these folks? And then assuming you have the hygiene space, if they're coming through hygiene, or do you have the space on the doctor's schedule, then you have to do something with these people when they're there. You have to do your exam, you have to do your diagnostics, your scans, things like this. That requires time. And then you have to have enough doctor and treatment coordinator time to present and get acceptance on the treatment that they need. So I've seen this happen where, taking that example, 30 new patients equals 50,000, and then there's the instant idea that 60 is going to equal 100,000. And they get their 60 new patients because that, believe it or not, is the easiest part of the equation. And they only make an extra $10,000 or $20,000 instead of an extra 50. Well, what happened? Well, the doctor used to have enough time to really explain treatment when they were seeing 30 new patients. So now that they're getting 60, he's having to cut short his treatment presentations and maybe pass them to the treatment coordinator a lot earlier than he or she would have wanted to. And the treatment coordinator is also busy, so the treatment coordinator, two things are happening there. They don't have enough time to spend with patients like they did at 30 new patients, and that they used to, right? And also the follow-up time that they used to have to follow up with patients who didn't accept same day is pretty much obliterated because now they're handling new patients all day long. So they don't see that translated, those 30 new patients translated into that additional, or 30 additional patients rather, translated into that additional $50,000. So if you're looking at this as a solution to raise income, you have to make sure that you raise up the other things at the same time. So I make sure that I have enough the people at the front with these additional, because you have to take a look at how many phone calls did it take to get those 30 new patients. Well, if your conversion rate is 50%, that means 60 patients had to call before 30 were scheduled, which should be better, by the way, but let's say that's what it is. 60 phone calls equals 30 new patients. Well, now to get 60, you need 120 phone calls. Do the people at the front have enough time to properly handle these inquiries? Because that may kill your whole marketing campaign right there. Now they're rushed, and there's nothing worse than calling a practice as a new patient and the person has to put you on hold 8 times and they sound like they're having a bad day. That's usually not a good vibe to set with a prospective new patient. So you have to check, do I have enough time at the front to actually accommodate these leads? Do I have enough places in the schedule for them to go? Am I going to have enough time to sell properly? And if not, you're going to have to expand those things somehow. It might be extra treatment coordinator time. It might be retooling the way that the doctor's schedule works. There's things you're going to have to look at in order to make sure you accommodate this, or that idea of more new patients because you want to grow really aggressively isn't going to necessarily translate into more income. You know where you see this very often is when a doctor buys another doctor's charts. Because it seems really cool, right? I just bought 500 charts, and you get this initial just jump of people coming in the beginning, and you'll see a jump in collections, but the potential of that jump is not nearly maximized. They could have done a lot better with the number of people coming in if they had the facilities, the time, and the personnel to actually handle that incoming flow. So assuming you can accommodate that additional flow, great. Don't lose sight of the rest of the practice. You could get into this frame of mind. People always like new things. So you want to make sure hygiene's being maximized out, et cetera, and you have the ability to accommodate these new patients. And, probably a smarter way to do it is ramp up. You're getting 30 now, let's add an additional 10. Because at 60, you might need more personnel, which is a sizable investment. So you go, okay, 30 to 40. All right, now 30 to 50. All right, let's hire a second treatment coordinator. All right, 30 to 60. Let's get another part-time person at the front, or we're going to hire a new patient coordinator while we expand, and then we can move it up to 70. The idea is ramp it up over time so that you can have sustained growth. Seems to be a more efficient way of going about and doing that. One thing I forgot to mention when I was talking about the hygiene stuff, I do have a free download for you this week. We have our hygiene formula. I've thrown this out there before. This is a great way for you to check. It's a spreadsheet. You just enter the numbers in your practice. It's a good way to check the health of your hygiene department, and you can kind of compare it to where you should be and compare it, obviously, with the numbers I'm giving you with new patients. You can compare where you at with relation to new patients, are you low or high, and where you at with hygiene compliance, and it might give you some insight as to why, you feel like you need more new patients than you actually need. Anyway, That's all I have for you this week. I do hope that helps. If you wanted to learn more about MGE, you can find us online at mgeonline.com or call us at 800-640-1140. Folks, have a great week, and we'll see you at the next episode.